What is the husband stitch? Is it a myth? An urban legend? A shitty joke? Well, it is fortunately now medical malpractice, but for a lot of people who have given birth, it is a very, very real medical phenomenon. It's a cosmetic procedure. That means it is not medically necessary, that involves adding one or more extra sutures to the vaginal opening after someone has given birth. The claimed purpose of said extra suture? To make the vaginal opening tighter, thus making intercourse more pleasurable for the male partner. But Liz, does it work? No. Vaginal tone has to do with pelvic floor strength, not the size of the opening. It is a muscle. Not only is the husband stitch not an approved medical procedure, but the effects of it also vary from person to person. There's no clear method for evaluating its prevalence. We have anecdotal evidence from people who have experienced this invasive procedure, often without their consent. Our current medical practices have a long history of certain things being done not for the well-being or best interest of the patient, but for the convenience of the medical professionals. Things like episiotomies in the early to mid 1900s were not only done routinely, but were encouraged and taught to be good for the person giving birth. Medical belief was that a clean cut would heal better than a natural tear. The mere existence, much less the common practice of things like pregnant people giving birth on their backs, episiotomies where people are literally sliced open, or the husband stitch, things that are not only not medically necessary, but often worse for the person that is giving birth. This is where our for-convenience and for-profit healthcare system intersects with our patriarchal society's general dehumanization and objectification of women. There are people that suffer the rest of their lives because of this practice. Angela Sanford, a 36-year-old mom from South Carolina, received a husband stitch when she gave birth to her first child in 2008, and she didn't find out about this until 5 years later when she went to an appointment with a new nurse midwife who she had never seen before. Angela sought out new care after self-described excruciating pain during intercourse. Angela said, "I couldn't connect in my mind why it would be called the husband stitch. My husband has been worried about me and fearful of hurting me. He would never have asked for this." 27-year-old Tamara Williams in Texas found out she'd been given a husband stitch in 2015 after her boyfriend mentioned overhearing the birth center midwife say she'd throw in an extra stitch for him. After her 2005 birth, Sarah Harkin's family doctor said to her husband, "Yeah, let's go ahead and add in another stitch so we can make sure this is nice and tight." Sarah says, "In the moment, I wouldn't have used the word violated because my brain just couldn't process violation at that time. But now that I've had time to process, I have a clear sense of what I went through and what was done to me. The injustice to wound me in my privates at a time when I was most vulnerable." Doctors should be there for the best interest and well-being of their patient, not a third-party person. And while this is likely a procedure that happens less often in our modern era, it more than likely does still happen. So what can you do if you are concerned about this happening to you? Talk to your medical care team. Make sure they are aware that this is something that you are concerned about. And if you can have someone in the room with you during your birth, make sure they also know and are willing and able to intervene if necessary on your behalf. If you check out my new gynecology history playlist, you'll see that women's bodies have a long medical history of being treated like objects. Hopefully with our more modern push for evidence-based care, this is something that will completely die out, but if you didn't know, now you know about the husband stitch.
Husbands be like, "My wife had kids, needs to be tightened up down there."
Let me tell you something that makes that 10 times worse. P.S. I'm going to try to keep it PG-13 so that TikTok doesn't take it down. Okay. First, it's important to note that episiotomies used to be standard practice, which means that the doctor would make an incision to make the opening a little bigger. After mom had the baby, the doctor would then sew up the incision that he made. And it was very common for doctors to add an extra little stitch without telling the mom, and most of the time without even telling the dad. Why, you ask? To make the hole smaller and tighter than it was before. They referred to it as the husband stitch or the daddy stitch. They saw it as a little favor for daddy. But all it really did was make very painful for the moms after.
Imagine you're laying on that bed, you've just given birth, and your husband or your partner asks the doctor to give you an extra stitch down there to make it nice and tight for him after you've just had a baby. That, ladies and gentlemen, is called the husband stitch, and it's absolutely the most disgusting thing I have learned about in my entire life.
Story time with Dr. Rosen. You're going to want to buckle up and stick around for the end of this one because it is serious. Saw this article this weekend. Is the husband stitch a medical myth? Let me tell you, people, this story from my training. 23 years ago, I'm a third-year medical student. You do rotations in the different disciplines of medicine. I did 6 weeks of psychiatry, 8 weeks of internal medicine, and then I start my OBGYN rotation. It's my first delivery. You know, the woman's legs are up in stirrups. She's screaming and sweating. The gynecologist is positioned down on one knee between her legs. He's a guy, mid-50s. He decides this woman needs an episiotomy, which is where you make a cut in the woman's perineum, a controlled incision so that there isn't an uncontrolled tear. And it's typically made off to the side rather than straight down because you want to avoid a large tear back into the rectum, which is much harder to close than something off to the side. So he takes the scissors and he puts it in and he makes this cut. And there's a gush of blood and a gush of fluid and the gush of a baby coming out. It was beautiful. It was awe-inspiring. The doctor passes the baby off. The baby's crying. The mom's crying. I'm crying. It's crazy. The nurse starts cleaning off the baby, and the doctor grabs a stool and wheels it in between the woman's legs, and a tray with a suture and a needle are put in front of him, and he begins to close up this woman's lady bits. He starts deep inside where the incision or cut that he made originated, and he's closing the muscle and the soft tissue above it, and he's working his way out. And then once he's all the way out, he sort of begins a little more superficial at the skin level and works his way back in. And as he gets to the transition from skin back into the mucosa of the woman's private area, he turns to me and sort of pauses. And with this lecherous, really weird look on his face, he goes, and this last one's called the daddy stitch. And then he kind of like takes this flourishing bite, you know, and like ties it down. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. I was totally in shock, but it totally happened. And I want to know in the comments below if this has happened to you. I'm so sorry. It's horrible. What were the ramifications? And if you were an OBGYN, I would like your take on this story too.
We have to talk about this. The husband stitch. What the heck? I cannot even believe that it is so much information out there on this because wow. Now, in my own experience as a labor and delivery nurse, maybe a handful of times after delivery, I have heard a dad or significant other say, hey, can you put an extra stitch in there? Or can you make it extra tight? And oh, the thoughts that go through my head when I've heard that are, I mean, I just cringe. I thought it was just a joke. And then I think maybe once I've heard a doctor say, do you want me to put a stitch in there? However, digging deeper, prompted by you guys make me do a lot of research, I'll tell you that. But digging deeper and trying to understand what's going on, like what can you do to avoid it has been very enlightening. Husband stitch is illegal in the United States. It is when the provider puts an extra stitch in the skin right at the vaginal opening or maybe the muscle right behind the opening in an attempt to tighten things to increase sexual pleasure for the male partner. It does not do that. It actually increases dissatisfaction because it's very uncomfortable for both partners generally. Sexual satisfaction is increased by tone of the pelvic floor muscles, not the size of the opening. That's important to note because there are some women who request this extra stitch to be placed. Now, your best bet as a birthing person to go in and try to avoid getting this husband stitch is to do everything you can to keep your perineum intact and to protect that perineum. How are you going to do that? Let's talk about it. Being in an upright position when you give birth, not laying flat on your back. Avoid an episiotomy, so movement in labor, movement in pushing, being on your hands and knees when you deliver or on your side. Don't be flat on your back. That's really important. Warm compresses on your perineum, that's good. Some people believe and experience increased stretchiness with perineal massage during the prenatal period, starting at about 34 weeks. So you can do some research on that. I'm not going to go into specifics here because I'm running out of time. But here's the thing. Doing your research, trying your best to protect your perineum so it decreases the chances of tearing is your best way to avoid this husband stitch. The next thing is keep the lines of communication open with your provider. Let them know that this is a big fear of yours and that it is a concern. It is malpractice, and if it does happen, you need to make sure you take action against it. Tell me what's your experience. Did you have a husband stitch? Do you know somebody who did?
Imagine going in to have a baby and you have to be concerned about not getting a tear because you don't want someone to unknowingly give you the husband stitch. That shouldn't be something that's on your mind because that shouldn't be a practice that's done in the first place. Women have been so objectified throughout history. It is absolutely insane. And imagine the type of partner you have to be to ask a doctor to give this woman an extra stitch. This woman who is on the bed just gave birth to your child. Imagine how disgusting of a person you would have to be to ask for something like that done to a woman unknowingly because you want to make sure that you secure your sexual pleasure after she has healed. And what type of uneducated and insensitive doctor would actually do a husband stitch on a woman unknowingly, unprovoked? She didn't ask you for this. Or to even ask the partner if he wants that done to her. She is the patient. If you are concerned about this is a conversation you would have with the patient who just delivered a baby. She is the one you would be operating on, and the tightness of her vagina should be her concern and not yours as a doctor and not the partner's concern. Like, I have been thinking about this for a few days, and I have come to the conclusion that men who ask the doctors to do this do not in any way truly love and care for their partners. What are your thoughts on the husband stitch? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you down in the comments, and I'll definitely be seeing you in my next video.